Hello and welcome to our webinar on understanding children and young people's mental health. This is a webinar for parents and carers and it is being provided by Me and My Mind, who are the East Sussex mental health support team. Today I'll be presenting with my colleague Katie. My name is Lottie and we are both education mental health practitioners who work for Me and My Mind. This is a pre-recorded presentation, so please do feel free to pause throughout the slides, to take a short break to reflect on any questions we're asking you or to absorb any of the information that we're sharing. Throughout the presentation, we'll be touching on topics around the mental health difficulties that children and young people can face. On the next slide, I'm going to talk you through some of our learning objectives for today. There are four main learning objectives for the webinar today, and you can see them here on your screen. The first is to be able to understand mental health difficulties in children and young people, and then we'll be learning about the signs of these mental health difficulties. We'll then move on to spend some time trying to understand when a child might need further support, and within this we'll cover topics around how to talk to your child about their potential mental health difficulties. And finally, we're going to cover the different services that are available to support children and young people who are showing signs of mental health. And we refer to this as signposting. Now, Me and My Mind is a team based within East Sussex, so the majority of the services we're going to be discussing will be based within this area as well. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Katie to tell you a little bit about mental health.
What is mental health? If you can just take a minute to think, what is your understanding of what mental health is? And what is your understanding of mental health difficulties? Mental health and mental health difficulties are often used as if they mean the same thing. However, they mean different things. In many ways, mental health is just like physical health. Everybody has it and we need to take care of it. Our mental health involves the way we think, feel, and what we do and our ability to solve problems. However, it is very common for people to experience poor mental health, in which thinking, feeling and behaving becomes more frequent and difficult to cope with. Not everyone who has poor mental health have a mental health illness. However, people with mental health difficulties or illnesses find the way they think, feel, behave or interact with others is affected. There are many different mental illnesses that can have different symptoms that impact people's lives in different ways. We will look at the most common in the following slides. Common mental health difficulties in children and young people. We all have times when we feel low, sad, or even stressed, or even a bit overwhelmed by something that is happening in our lives. It's also possible to experience good mental health, even with a diagnosis of a mental illness. This is because mental illness, like other health issues, can be episodic, meaning there are times of ill health and times of better or good health. More children and young people need help and support for their emotional health and well-being across Sussex each year. The coronavirus pandemic led to a fast increase in need. It is reported that children and young people experience the following difficulties: phobias, anxiety and worry, low mood, sleep and eating problems. We will be talking about mild to moderate mental health difficulties. All that means is earlier signs and difficulties that you might just be noticing or have been going on for a short while, but your children are able to cope without too much impact. If the presentation highlights that your child's difficulties are at a higher level, then our service may be able to support with signposting. We will be going through signposting and other support options at the end of the presentation.
When we start to think about mental health in children and young people, it's really important to consider the developmental stage that your child is at. So here we've outlined some of the usual anxieties and difficulties that you can expect children to experience between toddler and middle childhood into late childhood, so that's kind of primary school age, and then late childhood into adolescence. It's really helpful for us to think about whether the need your child is expressing is a usual part of their developmental stage, or if potentially they're developing some form of mental health difficulty. So just being aware of, are the anxieties and difficulties they're showing something to be expected, such as some difficulty separating from caregivers as a toddler, feeling some anxiety around pleasing new friends in middle childhood, or starting to have increasing difficulties with emotional regulation around their trusted caregivers as children enter adolescence. One of the reasons it's important to consider the developmental stage of your child is that you can also then think about the hormonal changes they may be facing at this stage. Hormonal changes can contribute to the development of mental health difficulties in many different ways, and can in particular make teens more likely to experience symptoms. It's completely normal for the onset of puberty and therefore these hormonal changes to begin at any point between the age of 8 and 14. And during this stage, emotions can become heightened, young people's focus can shift from their individual needs and starting to place more importance on what their peers think about them. Some teens can have an experience of almost role confusion, and so they're struggling to come to terms with what their own identity is, what their identity is in relation to their peers, and all these things can impact their ability to control their emotions, their impulses, how much they're able to problem solve and concentrate. And all of those factors can lead to an increase in low mood, anxieties, and decreases in self-esteem. Because of this, signs of mental health difficulties can look different to teens and adolescents to what we might see in adults. As well as considering developmental stage and any hormonal changes happening for your child, there are a range of other contributing factors that can have an impact on whether a young person may experience some mental health difficulties. So over this slide and the following slide, we're going to outline some of the contributing factors that can have an impact on mental health. And I won't go through listing them all to you, but on this slide, we're just outlining some of the lifestyle factors, so things that are going on around the child or young person that may impact on their mental health, and also school-based factors. So events we can expect to happen as part of the normal school experience, but may have increased impact on some young people's mental health and well-being. And on this slide, we're continuing to outline some of the potential contributing factors to a young person's experience of mental health. So on this slide, we have different identity and experiences that might be going on for young people, and we also have home-based factors. And it's important for us to flag that we're not saying that if your child is someone who identifies as part of the LGBTQ community, or if you're a carer to a looked after child, or that there has been issues of maybe poverty or unemployment in your home, that your child is definitely going to experience mental health conditions. We're not saying that. What we are highlighting is that sometimes children can be at an increased vulnerability of experiencing mental health difficulties because of the contributing factors we've outlined here and on the previous slide. So really what we want to remember is that as parents, we may or may not have control over what happens to our child, and we can't always stop a mental health difficulty occurring. So what we can do and what we want to do today is to think about, well, what is our role as parents in identifying and understanding what is maintaining and keeping a difficulty stuck for our children, and starting to think about who and what can help with that. Finally, I just wanted to bring together what we've been covering on the last few slides with an analogy about baking that one of my colleagues shared with me. And they were drawing the similarity between the process of baking and the process of raising a child, and how the different ingredients that go into baking massively impact what product you get at the end. So whether you're baking a loaf of bread or a cake, or if you're making scones or a pancake, all these things impact when you put the ingredients in, how much of each ingredient goes in. Whereas with children, if we imagine that flour might be their school experiences, and the butter might be the home environment you've provided for them, and the sugar is their peer experiences that they have, there's only so much we can control about these ingredients going in. But regardless of what order the ingredients are added or how much is put in, you're still getting a delicious baked good. And in our case, you're still getting a wonderful child with a range of experiences, but who is unique in their own way based on what's happened to them and in what order and at what time. I just like that analogy for really highlighting how, you know, it's important to understand what has happened, but also to accept that we cannot control all the factors that have impacted our children and young people up until now. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Katie, who's going to start to talk a little bit more about how behaviour can indicate different things about our children and their well-being.
Behaviour is like an iceberg. The theory behind the iceberg analogy of childhood behaviour is that there are many things that influence the way that children act and react. Children sometimes have trouble communicating because they may not be able to verbally describe the problem. They might not want to get others into trouble, or they're not understanding a situation to be able to put it into words. At these times, children may act out their feelings or needs. Children engage in challenging behaviour for a reason. The purpose may be getting someone's attention, stopping an activity they don't like, or satisfying sensory needs. For example, if you think back to when your child was a baby and they wanted feeding, they would cry. If they wanted a cuddle, they would cry, and so on. There is always a reason behind the behaviour. It is important to remember that sometimes a behaviour that challenges us is the only way a child or young person can get others to listen to them, or they just simply do not know any other way to try and tell you what they need.
We want to keep this idea that all behaviour is a form of communication in mind while we now move through some discussion of what anxiety and low mood might look and feel like for children and young people.
What anxiety might feel like. Some of the children and young people we work with have described the following thoughts, emotions, and physical symptoms they experience on a daily basis. They've described racing thoughts, usually scary, predicting the worst. Emotions that they feel: frightened, panicky, anxious, worried, irritable, and angry. Physical symptoms that they experience are dizzy, heavy breathing, fast heartbeat, dry mouth, sweaty palms, feeling sick or shaky. We all get anxious from time to time, when we have to take a test, for example, or if we have to give a talk in public. This short-term type of anxiety is useful because it makes us feel more alert and improves our performance. But if anxiety stays at a high level for a long time, it can make it difficult to get on with life. Everyone's symptoms of anxiety might be different, but they are all bodily reactions. What anxiety in children can look like. Most of us have heard of the fight, flight, freeze, flop or flock analogy. These responses are necessary. They are your survival instincts and you need them. They keep you out of harm's way. You couldn't survive without them. We are all scared of things. Sometimes being frightened of something can even be healthy at times. For example, being scared of getting too close to a fire could save you from getting burnt. Here's how the fight or flight response works. Imagine you're a caveman all those hundreds of thousands of years ago, and one day, whilst you are out hunting, you come face to face with a hungry tiger. The choices you have: you could run as fast as you can. This is flight. You could pick up your club and you could fight with the tiger. This is fight. You could do nothing. This is called freeze or flop. Or you could retreat back to your family and ask for reassurance and support. Our bodies get ready for fight or flight when there is something dangerous, but sometimes our bodies may get ready for fight or flight when there is no danger. Both of these make us feel scared, so it can be difficult to tell if there is something dangerous or not. These feelings can be very frightening, and sometimes anxiety can get in the way of things you need to do and want to do, like sleeping, doing schoolwork, visiting new places, or playing with your friends. We have learnt what our bodies do when we are scared and how our body gets ready for fight or flight. So remember I said we need these responses to survive. This is true, yet they are not meant to be on 24/7. Anxiety only becomes a problem when it interferes with our performance in our everyday lives. We cannot banish anxiety completely from our lives, but we can learn to manage it.
Another mental health difficulty children and young people can struggle with is experiencing low mood. It's important to remember while thinking about low mood that how this can be experienced by children and young people is quite different to how adults may experience depression. In many cases, depressed adults will feel their emotions heighten and they may feel more sensitive to things. However, it's more common that for young people, you might notice a shutting down or an avoidance of an emotional situations. And that's one of the reasons we use the term low mood. As you may notice, that young people express feeling low or numb, or maybe just sad and hopeless. Some of the thoughts that we found are very common in young people we work with low mood are thoughts that circulate around sad times or things that have happened in the past and being unable to let those go, or being unable to see the good in things going on at the moment. A common phrase we hear is nothing is much fun anymore. There can also be some physical experiences of being low, so feeling very tearful or low in energy and crying more often. Also, a loss of interest and concentration is a clear physical sign. You may find that young people who are experiencing low mood withdraw from doing activities they previously used to enjoy. What low mood might look like. Low mood and experience of depression can alter young people's behaviour patterns, the way they're thinking and the way they're feeling. They may experience feelings of bottomless sadness, feeling upset or never happy, senses of hopelessness, being tearful or constantly low. And these feelings are constantly present for the young people, unlike an experience of just feeling sad for a brief period of time in reaction to an event. They may also experience feeling numb and having a loss of interest and motivation in things. Sometimes there may be an event that's happened, such as an injury or a loss of a pet or a falling out with a friend, which can lead to a temporary withdrawal from things that young people previously enjoyed. But then slowly over time, this can build into a cycle of them continuing to withdraw and becoming more low the more they're pulling away from activities they used to enjoy. It's important to remember that with low mood, sometimes this can present in different ways. It can be found that some young people are easily wound up and become more short-tempered or have outbursts of anger and mood swings if they're experiencing low mood. And you may also notice particularly negative ways of thinking. So seeing that your child overanalyzes, is always overthinking or worrying and becomes stuck in negative cycles of thinking, especially about themselves.
What sleep difficulties might look like. Lots of children and young people find it difficult getting to sleep, staying asleep, or wake too early. Children and young people need at least 9 hours of sleep every night. Sleep problems and lack of sleep can have negative effects on children's performance in school, during extracurricular activities, and in social relationships. I wonder if you can take a moment to think how you perform if you haven't had enough sleep the night before. This is the same for children as it is in adults. Every child is different. For some people, this might not be a problem, but lack of sleep can cause irritability, increased stress, forgetfulness, difficulties with learning, and low motivation. Over time, it can contribute to anxiety and low mood.
What eating difficulties might look like. Eating difficulties can appear in a range of different ways, and this can be seen in young people restricting what they eat or eating certain foods in secret. You may also notice a change in your young person's ideas about themselves and their self-image. It's important to note that changes in weight and exercise routine are normal as children grow up, but it is important to consider if the change is immediate and big. or if you can see there's a relation between that change and some strict ideas that your child has about themselves or their bodies. As a service, we cannot provide support for young people who are experiencing disordered eating. However, we do find that there are lots of cases where young people might need some support with maintaining a healthy eating routine, and that this is something that is interacting with their mental health and well-being. It's important to make sure that your child has access to the right services if you are concerned they're experiencing some difficulties with eating, and we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end of the presentation too. When reflecting on the different sleep difficulties that Katie outlined and some of the eating difficulties that I just touched on, it is important to remember that sometimes difficulties around sleep or eating can be a sign and symptom of an underlying anxiety or low mood difficulty. However, they can also be a difficulty in their own right. So if you're noticing changes in sleeping, eating habits and behaviours, it can be a really good time to step back and start a conversation and also to think about any other signs of difficulties that your child may be experiencing. Some common examples of this might be some children stop eating breakfast when they're experiencing increased anxiety about going into school, as they're feeling nauseous before going in and therefore not in the mood to eat. There may also be cases of young people spending a lot more time in bed, sleeping more frequently and doing this instead of engaging in activities they previously enjoyed, which could be a sign they're experiencing some low mood. However, sleep and eating difficulties can exist on their own, and they're all important signs that there might be something worth talking to your child about. Katie's now going to talk to us a little bit more about how you can open up the conversation and discuss mental health with your children.
If you were feeling anxious or low, which response would you prefer? No parent wants to see their child upset, but sometimes it's hard to know how to react when your child is nervous, anxious, or afraid. Do you hug them? Do you let them cry out? Do you tell them it's all in their head? Do you tell them just to get on with things? There's so much conflicting advice out there. Discussing mental health with your child can be very difficult. Take a moment now and pause the video. Consider, if you were anxious, which type of response would you prefer? Now take a moment, pause the video again, and consider, if you were low, which type of response would you prefer? Next time you're faced with reacting to your nervous or fearful or anxious child, reflect back on which response you thought you would prefer. Frustration, reassurance, or hand-holding. By seeking to understand your child, it becomes more apparent if this is a mental health difficulty or a normal response to a tough situation, for example, bullying or academic expectations. Open questions. These can help children and young people feel more understood and feel less pressure. It can be harder to be honest to admit you didn't have such a good day to a closed question, such as "Did you have a good day?" than just to be invited to talk about your day. How was your day? Try to understand what they think is going on or might happen. What do you think will happen if? Has this happened before? Does it still happen? Take a moment now to think about how you feel if you're tired or stressed and somebody asks you in passing. Do you answer? Do you say you're fine? What would you like to respond? It can be really tempting to jump in and solve problems when we see our child is in distress, but allowing them autonomy to fix their own problems and problem solve can feel empowering. If you think they want advice, ask, "Would you like some advice, or do you just want me to listen?" Showing empathy involves understanding what your child is going through. It can be hard to show empathy when you're frustrated about a situation. Acknowledging and normalising your child's feelings is a powerful way to connect. Imagine this scenario. Your child has trouble getting organised and out the door for school. This morning you're both going to be late, and it's the third time this week. Frustrated, you yell for your child to hurry up. Your reaction is understandable. Neither of you can afford to constantly be late, and your child needs to learn strategies to manage time better. Reacting with frustration puts the focus on how you feel rather than on what's happening with your child, who may be struggling to get ready. Showing empathy can change the dynamic. It lets you acknowledge not only what you see and feel, but also what your child is feeling. It helps you to stop and think about what you may not be seeing. Empathy is a way of connecting. It shows children you know they're experiencing something, even if you don't understand exactly how it feels to them. Empathy says, I want you to know you're not alone, and I want to understand how this feels to you. Praise is when you tell your child that you like what they're doing or how they're behaving. For example, you sat in the dentist's chair even though you were feeling nervous. I'm very impressed. I can see that it took you a lot of courage to go in the classroom alone. Well done. I remember when you first went to football club, you were really scared, but you went anyway. Now you really look forward to it. Praise nurtures your child's confidence and sense of self. By using praise, you're showing your child how to think and talk positively about themselves. You're helping your child learn how to recognise when they do well and feel proud of themselves. You can praise children of different ages for different things. You might praise a younger child for sharing or for leaving the park when asked. You can praise a teenage child for coming home at an agreed time or for starting homework without being reminded. Descriptive praise is when you tell your child exactly what it is that you like. For example, I like the way you found a spot for everything in your room. This helps your child understand exactly what it is that they've done well. It's also more genuine than non-specific praise, like you're a good boy.
So far, we have spent some time thinking about the different mental health difficulties that children and young people are commonly faced with. We've also spent some time thinking about the different ways you can talk to your children if you feel like they may be experiencing some mental health difficulties. At this point, it's important for us to consider when to seek further help. The most important thing that we want you to take away from this is to trust your instincts as a parent. If you notice any big changes in your children, or you feel that the difficulties they're experiencing are making them unable to participate in things they previously enjoyed, or that these difficulties have been going on for a longer period of time, it's important to seek support. Over the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about what Me and My Mind can help with and what other services are available in the East Sussex area. But it's important to remember that at any time you do feel you need further support with your child's mental health, you can always speak to their school or speak to your GP about this. Me and My Mind are the East Sussex Mental Health Support Team, and we're currently in 53 schools across East Sussex. We're based in schools in Peacehaven, Newhaven, Seaford, Eastbourne, Hailsham, Bexhill, and in the Hastings area as well. However, there are some schools where we are not based, and unfortunately, if we're not in your child's school, you cannot access our service for support. So please do make sure you speak with either your children's class teacher or potentially their SENCO or the pastoral lead for the school to find out if they do have access to our service. In the case that Me and My Mind are not available, there will be some other services that we'll be talking about in a moment who could be best placed to support your children instead. So Me and My Mind are a service who work with children who are experiencing mild to moderate difficulties. So this usually means that your child wants to have support, they're open to receiving support for their mental health, and that the symptoms that they're experiencing are making their life more difficult than usual. However, they wouldn't be at a point where their mental health difficulties would be seen as severe. And what this means is that they're not having many symptoms that make their life extremely difficult. The reason for this is that more severe mental health difficulties often require more specialist help, and this can require going down alternative routes such as the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services CAMS, who you may have heard of before. As we've mentioned previously in this webinar, Me and My Mind are a service for young people experiencing mild to moderate mental health difficulties. With this in mind, we haven't discussed any self-harming behaviours or thoughts, or suicidal thoughts and feelings, or any other risk factors in this presentation about mental health in children and young people. However, we are aware that for lots of parents this is a concern with their children. If this is something that you're concerned about with your child, we would really encourage you to speak directly to your child's school, because they can support both you and your child with these thoughts, feelings and behaviours. There's also the option to independently contact the text service Shout, who are available 24/7 for advice, information and listening support, and we'll provide the details about this later on. On this slide, we're listing some of the different services that are available in East Sussex. You may want to pause here and take note of any that feel particularly relevant to you. Firstly, there is iRock, who are a service available to adolescents between the ages of 14 and 25. You can self-refer to iRock for consultation, and they can support in making onwards referrals if they feel that a mental health difficulty needs certain support. They also have knowledge of which schools we're in, so for any reason that's the easiest route for you to access, they may pass a referral on to us here at Me and My Mind. There's lots of online support, such as eMotion for online counselling. Time to Talk is a mediation service which can provide support for parents and also support for intergenerational mediation if there are issues ongoing between your young people and you and there's a need for a third party to support in this. Single point of access is county-wide, and it's a referral point that can be used by schools and also by families themselves. A range of different services have access to these referrals, so they can look at what issues have been raised and guide on where would be best to seek support. Dragonflies are a charity who offer bereavement support in the Hastings, Rother and Eastbourne areas. They offer one-to-one counselling for young people. They also offer group support. Eggtooth offer therapeutic support for children of all ages, but this is only in the Hastings area. And Young Minds is a national service. This is where the Shout text line is that I referenced earlier. So if you text YM for Young Minds to the number 85258, then young people can receive support at any time. And this can be support with general mental health worries, or it can be specifically around any thoughts about suicide or self-harm. And there's also a parent helpline for Young Minds, which is listed here. It can be really important to familiarise yourself with a service before contacting them so you know what to expect. So please do feel free to give these services a Google, have a look at their websites. They also have a lot of really helpful free resources on their websites, which might be helpful both for you and also for your children to look at. As we mentioned earlier, speaking to your school about your child's mental health difficulties is a really important step in gaining support for your child. This can sometimes feel daunting, but it's really important to remember that schools are here to support us, and they will have a range of resources available to them to help your child with any mental health difficulties that they're experiencing. You might feel comfortable speaking to an adult who you see frequently at school, such as your child's class teacher, their form tutor or their head of year. These adults will be able to tell you who best you need to discuss your child's difficulties with to access the support that they need. If your school has access to Me and My Mind, the mental health support team, and you would like your child to come have some sessions with an education mental health practitioner like Katie or myself, then this needs to be done through school as well. In every school, we have a link person who's responsible for doing all the referrals and getting the paperwork over to us. So if you know that we're a service that's available to you, please do speak to your schools, as they'll be able to facilitate getting access to our service. It's also worth bearing in mind that schools may have access to other services. They may have counselling available, they may have groups that are run, and that these might be things that your child could benefit from as well. So opening up this dialogue is a really important first step. If you do want to make contact with a different agency, such as Childline or Young Minds, to seek some support, that's absolutely fine. And we've listed the numbers again here on this slide if you want them.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar. This has been a brief introduction and overview of understanding mental health in children and young people. We've got more specific webinars which go into more detail on specific difficulties. You can also speak to school. If you have any questions or would like more details, please do contact us on the email listed here.